Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to review the Belko experiment. One thing that I want to say about this movie is it's kind of funny because this movie I always get confused with another film called Mayhem, which coincidentally came out at roughly the exact same time, which is to be interesting because in this movie we have Michael Rooker, who is to be from, of course, The Walking Dead, and in the Mayhem movie, the main character who I believe in that film is like Sam, who ends up playing Glenn, I think, from The Walking Dead. If I ill pronounce that, it's probably because I'm not looking at it. But so Mayhem, like if you like movies like this, also you can check out Mayhem 2017. That movie kind of has a little bit more of like a different approach to it because Mayhem has it to where eventually um, a bunch of office workers just become like rage monsters and there's nothing they can do. Where uh, like this movie, it's just people that are to be left to their own devices, but they're also to be forced by some loudspeaker telling them what to do or else. So uh really, so here's the let's just easily get to the teeing up version of this. Like, first off, that I'd have to say, like, this is a interesting movie but also a sad film, um just because really it's like we get to a point in this movie where there's to be forcibly like a firing squad where certain people are to basically think that what they're doing is like for the good of the group, but then eventually it further and further goes on to just like, okay, now you just have to kill everyone off. And so like at first it seems like a mercy killing, but then eventually it's just an all-out spree of just, okay, like everyone just has to die regardless. So but we have like a build up to it, and that's the thing that I like. It's not just like all of a sudden everybody's like, yeah, I want to just get this done. No, everybody's having a huge head hesitation, and a lot of people are just to be like, well, wait a minute, like maybe this is a prank. Maybe there's like something going on here, and we're like jumping too quickly to conclusions, uh, and so eventually there's a build up to the moment where eventually people are to have to realize that they're forced into this scenario because of supposedly the government, supposedly, is what they are to draw the conclusion of, weirdly. So, like, an interesting but sad film, and but eventually it just kind of becomes like a battle royale kind of situation, and I think a lot of people have technically liked things currently like death games, like Squid Game, or just stuff like that. So, like I of course remember this because I was kind of looking for some kind of movies that have this kind of death game kind of approach to it, and so like I remember this one, and of course the 2017 film Mayhem. Where can you go and find this film? I've been using an app called, like fairly reliably, called Fox HD Movies. You can probably go into Google Play and search for Fox HD Movies. The logo will say Fox HD Movies, but the title will say something completely different. Uh, you can go into that app, download it, watch this movie for free, as well as Mayhem if you want to decide to otherwise watch that film. And yeah, so let's kind of tee it up. What is this movie about? Well, we seem to have like a normal day in the office of a large group of people that are to eventually get ushered in by these brand new security guards that are to be in place. So, because eventually they're being like stopped like at this gate, and like everybody's to just kind of check whether or not that everyone is going to be easily uh, being able to work today, let's just say. So, because they end up getting rid of a specific group of people that just kind of randomly come in here and aren't really 100% tied to the company. So, So seemingly a normal working day for most of these people. They're like da 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 da, and uh, and so all of a sudden, eventually, we get where every single window is to be boarded up with these like uh, thick metal kind of sheets over them, to where seemingly no one can get in, no one can get out. Doors are being locked and all kinds of things, so no one is going to be able to get out of here unless they otherwise decide to uh, do anything like try to escape from the roof, which they can't do either. Because eventually shots will be fired onto the roof, which just pushes everybody back down to eventually just going back into um, this building and forced to fight it out. Because what ends up happening with these characters is there's to be a loudspeaker that goes overhead and basically tells people that they are forced to kill a certain number of people, or uh, the people over the intercom will decide how many people are to die, on top of the supposed first 30 that are to forcibly be killed. They're going to kill another 30 on top of that. So, because of course people like start to value their life, all of a sudden like knives are getting out. We all of a sudden have like people who are grabbing like heavy amounts of like chairs or whatever they can like eventually do to defend themselves. But everybody's like, whoa, 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 wait a minute, like don't everybody just lose their heads already? Like, come on, like, because supposedly they have 2 hours before the very first uh time of which that they are to supposedly kill these 30 people. So reasonably, they have some time to try to figure things out, to try to make a plan, to try to do something. And so that's where like the first kind of like early stages of this movie kind of get really interesting. So with that said, uh, there is going to be a lot of cast members in this movie. So, like, I'm gonna have to probably, like, I'm not gonna name off every single person. I'm probably just gonna do my best to eventually try and get like the more focused characters, but not all of this is gonna be perfect. So, um, yeah, because I didn't plan this ahead of time of who, of what, of all that I'd end up saying. So, let's go into this. Let's go into spoilers. So, check this out if you, without a doubt, kind of eventually maybe go into a trailer also. And I'm like, okay, this movie looks fascinating, because maybe you just hung in for the first 5 minutes to kind of see where uh, eventually this movie would head. Thank you for doing so. But let's go out of our way to go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time we do spoil this movie. So, like very beginning of the film, like I said, in the kind of teeing up version. So weirdly today, each person is to be trying to go into this building, and it seems like they weirdly have to like screen everybody, and it seems like there are some local people that end up getting told that they can't go into the building today. And so we have our CEO named Barry, who is kind of like popping his head out of the window, like, what's going on today? Why is this taking so long? And so, but eventually everyone ends up getting in there. Everybody's like, okay, like, this like seems like a normal day. So we end up kicking it off with Leandra, who is to eventually just spot a guy named Wyndham who is staring at her. And so Leandra goes and emails Wyndham and says, like, hey, like, normally when a person is to be realizing that you're staring at them, normally you stop looking at them. And Wyndham is like, oh, I'm sorry, I was just kind of just zoning off or whatever. So um, we really have this girl who is to like Wyndham is kind of this like creepy esh like guy, and Leandra is just like, dude, like I have no interest in ever being with you. Because eventually Leandra is much more interested in a guy named Mike. Uh, both of them kind of rush off to go into this own little office themselves and start kissing. All of a sudden, Barry is to eventually just walk in on them kissing. He's like, "Oh well, I'm sorry. Like I was, like I didn't know anyone was in here, but also like I thought we were all working, kind of thing." So Barry ends up kind of giving like asking Mike some kind of question, then he ends up leaving. Um, because hey, this is a normal working environment and whatever. Uh, so pushing on. Eventually, what ends up happening is we have certain kind of like I would call them maintenance guys, and so we have Bud and we have a guy named Lonnie who are to be down in this maintenance thing, and like these characters matter in the very like beginning of the film, but eventually they kind of quickly get brushed off because eventually these characters are gonna help out like when this first first moment arrives when all these metal like sheets start to cover up all these windows that are to be kind of like channeled in as these um, like safety precautional things. So, but we really open this movie with seemingly a brand new worker. I think that this girl is to be Danny. And so we have the HR person who is to kind of mention to Danny, it's like, oh, well, hey, did you get your like tracker onto the back of your neck or the back of your head? And Danny's like, oh, yeah, like that was kind of weird. And like the HR person is like, well, that's really just a precautionary measure because supposedly there have been a number of big, huge corporations that I guess it's tempting for horrible people to decide to go and take certain kind of corporate people hostage, and like with big businesses like ours and other people's, it's tempting for I guess people to take advantage of people and to kidnap them. So if people are to have the tracker on the back of their heads, like we're always going to be able to find where they are and be able to get and rescue them. Um, so think of it as a good thing. Don't think of it as a weird thing. So it's kind of like this HR guy is kind of putting this girl at ease, just saying like, "Hey man, we're all friends here." Uh, like, like just kind of being the normal H&R person, where like he's trying to like make this girl like immediately feel right at home and stuff like that. Just kind of so eventually we are to uh, kind of get people kind of going through their day to day, and then all of a sudden that's when the security measures just all start to pop off, and everybody's like, "Whoa!" And then all of a sudden we have somebody over the loudspeaker saying like, "I'm sorry, everybody. Like, drop whatever you're doing in your normal day to day and." Because you are to be a part of this experiment or whichever. And so everybody's just like, okay, well, I guess we're gonna have a day off, I guess. And so they don't know like where this is coming from. Like immediately we have where um, a lot of people are thinking that this is a prank, and Mike is to make the conclusion. The guy that we mostly seem to follow through most of this, Mike is to make the conclusion that it seems that like he makes the analysis that he's like, well, it's kind of weird that we ended up having these new security guards here. It seems that we also had this hangar that it seems like a lot of these security guards were coming from. Like maybe that's where these guys set everything up, and so maybe like that's what's really going on. And Barry is to hear this from Mike because Mike is the CEO, or the COO or something like that. He's like the highest, like superior to everybody. So, like Mike is to tell Barry this because Barry is to try to comfort everybody and is to tell him like, hey, like you know what, I'm going to try to make some phone calls. I'm going to try to uh, like mitigate this whole situation and kind of clear it up. So don't everybody freak out and like I'll see like what is going on. So and eventually Mike hits them with this information that he spotted because he was kind of looking out windows and stuff like that, just kind of seeing what's going on because this seemed very odd to him. And Barry is trying to comfort people by having Wyndham, the guy a lot of people probably know from Scrubs. I've seen him in Stand Against Evil or Stand. I think it's Stand Against Evil. Like it's either Stand Against Evil or Stand versus Evil. I think it's Against Evil because I always get those confused. That's on Hulu. If you've never seen that, go ahead and check that out. It's freaking hilarious. It's a really good supernatural show. So go ahead and check that out. So Wyndham is to go on and is to like start giving people water bottles as well as berries, kind of tossing them out and just to try to like get people at ease to just be like, hey, here's a water bottle. Like I know it's not medication or drugs or whatever, but here's water. Like it's something, right? So so Barry is to say that Mike is maybe quickly getting like paranoid or something like that, and we really just have to just take this and just kind of just really think that it's a prank. Like somebody's taking advantage of their security system or something like that. That's what's really going on here. So eventually, what they are to be told after Mike is to go with the maintenance guys, Bud, who is Michael Rooker's character, and Lonnie, to try and use some kind of torch against these walls to see if they can get this one of these glass walls open. And Bud is like, dude, we can't get this open. Like it's too thick. Like whoever like put these in place, they knew what they were doing. So eventually, over the overhead, they are to mention within 2 hours' time, 30 people need to be killed within this facility, or 30 people will get killed on top of that. So if no one kills anybody in 2 hours, 60 people, I believe, will be killed. So all of a sudden, like, people are starting to go into a place where, like, they end up going into, like, the security room to see if somebody's kind of messing with the microphones of the loudspeaker and realize that no one is there. So it's like, okay, like, so this is coming from outside somewhere, and how is it that people, like, thought all the way of this through? And so reasonably, Mike is coming up with this plan as well as some other people, not just Mike. And so their plan is to toss up signs on the top of the building, on top of the roof, and to try to see if anybody off of the road that they're to be on is to eventually see these signs, just like, oh, maybe we should go out and like try to like help them. So Barry thinks that that's possibly a waste of time, but Mike is like, well, we got to do something. Like, there's not much else we can do. So Barry is to eventually go to this security guard and to ask, like, this security guard, hey, like, you seem to have, like, keys that are to be into this one, like, armory spot of this place. Like, how about you give me those keys? Because, like, I think that, like, I don't think those keys are going to be safe in your hands. And so the security guard is like, no, I think my hands will be the only place where it'll actually be safe. He's like, I'm not giving these keys up to anybody. Like, they're going to have to pry them out of my cold, dead hands. And that might be a possibility in this movie. So every time anyone is to be asking for these keys, the security guard's like, no, I'm not going to give them up to anybody. Like, I'm not, like, because the security guard is the only guy that is to have a gun, and he's going to try to keep it that way. So that way no one goes freaking crazy and starts firing up this place because they are losing their freaking minds off of just anticipation of what the heck is going on. So the guys go up into the roof to find there seemingly is to be two like stoner guys up there. We have both uh, Sean Gunn, who is Marty, and another guy named Chet, I believe, who are just kind of up there like onto the roof, just kind of smoking weed, and they're like, "Man, do you believe in any of this stuff?" Like, and eventually, the more and more they go through this scenario, they get more and more paranoid that all of a sudden there's something in the water, like the cooler water, and so they try to uh, dump over every like cooler water or like the little drink machine things. They knock all those over because they're like I'm sure like they assume that the water is making people paranoid, so they're dunking all of those over, thinking that there's some kind of drugs in the water, and then eventually the more and more that these characters are to eventually get more and more afraid, we have Marty who's just thinking, maybe this is all just in my mind. Maybe it's all just in my mind. So, uh, so eventually, what ends up happening is that uh, people are to go onto the roof, and so they end up trying to chuck these signs, and all of a sudden we have the watch guys who kind of are looking up at the roof, and like one of them is still like waved down like, hey, like help me, and so all of a sudden we have sniper guys who are like firing off onto the rooftop, and so now these guys can't chuck these signs to try and get help because those security guards are going to prevent them from doing that. So they are to just forced to go back into the building because there's nothing better for them to do. So eventually, what happens and eventually what starts to pop off is all of a sudden they naturally assume that someone is shooting somebody in this building, and so everybody's just kind of running off and like, oh my god, like who's shooting, like who's shooting anyone, and all of a sudden they start to realize because Barry ends up going really close to one of the bodies and realizing that the back of his head was blown up, and so they realized that it wasn't somebody shooting anybody. No, evidently Mike is to realize that the trackers on the back of everyone's neck is to be an explosive, and so Mike goes and rushes to the bathroom to try to have his tracker removed, and all of a sudden the loudspeaker is to tell Mike like, hey, stop messing with your tracker or we're going to explode the device in 10 seconds. And so Mike is like crazily trying to get the tracker out of his back of his neck, and he ends up taking this like box cutter to his to the back of his neck, and Leandra is like banging on the bathroom door, like, "Hey, Mike, what are you doing?" So Mike eventually tries to crazily get this out, and he doesn't get it in time, so he just stops what he's doing. He raises his hand and stops what he's doing. So now the intercom system is to mention to everyone, like, "Hey, do not try to remove your trackers. Like, if anything, next time around, we won't be like as nice as we did with Mike and give you guys a countdown. So like you're just gonna die if you try to remove it." So it's like, okay, so people are forced to play the game no matter what. So so what ends up happening is now Barry and Wyndham are starting to choose people, starting to put certain people together that might have a uh, wife or kids, and so they end up kind of picking and grabbing this one guy, and it's just really like, well, you have like you have a wife and kids, right? And so the guy's like, well, yeah, sure. And so like, how about you team with us, and like, well, like, because I know that like my wife and my kid, like they need me too. So what eventually happens is that Wyndham and this group all go off to uh, try and break into the armory, and so they try to use this welding tool to uh, try and open up this spot. And so Mike and the security guard and Leandra go and find them doing this, and so the security guard is to whip his gun out, just like, dude, don't do that. And so, because they don't want everybody having a gun in their hand, like this would just be a uh, crazy event happening. But if anything, I guess when it really comes down to it, if like a bunch of people just had office supplies and they're killing people with office supplies, that has got to be the most horrific way to die. Like it's slow, painful, and whatever. Like I know eventually there's to be some like axes and stuff like that going on, and like they end up going into the kitchen in the early part of the thing and just like get knives and stuff. But still, um, it seems like a horrific way to die. It's slow and horrific, but like, like anyways. So Mike is to go and fire with the security guard's gun the welding tool so that way they can't weld anymore. And so he's like, well, I guess that solves that then, right? That there's only going to be one gun here, and it's going to be the security guards. So, but that's not going to be for long. Uh, so eventually, what ends up happening in this movie is that people start to decide, like, well, we're going to get those keys. We're going to go and get those keys. So Mike, Leandra, and the security guard, God, what is the guy's name? Um, Evan? Evan. Uh, all three of these people eventually are in this stairwell, and Wyndham's group eventually corners these people. And Barry is to mention that Mike is causing a lot of problems with everyone, and Wyndham is to take the keys from Evan one way or the other by stabbing him in the chest and then taking the keys. Basically saying that these people were eventually going to die anyways. So now, like, Mike and Leandra are forced to be grouped up with a lot of people because this big group is to eventually push everybody back into one place. All the while, we have a girl like Danny who's to be in the like the boiler room of this building, and so we start to kind of see dissension in the ranks between both Bud, who's Michael Rooker's character, and Lonnie, and so Lonnie starts to get really like scared about this whole situation and accidentally clobbers Bud into the head where it crushes his skull and he ends up dying. And Danny's to all of a sudden spot like what had happened, and so Danny is to mention to Lonnie that she didn't see what was going on, but Lonnie's going to try and kill her anyways. So eventually Danny and Lonnie are to go into like a scuffle or something, and Lonnie ends up being like rammed into this one like spike thing, and he ends up getting killed also. Um, so Danny just starts hiding in the boiler room, like behind boxes or whatever. Eventually, when people are to try and pull like people out, because eventually they get guns and stuff like that. One guy with a gun is to see Danny, but he ends up just walking off to just be like, "Hey, like I don't want to kill everybody or whatever," because he doesn't know what's going on as well as no one else knows. Uh, so Barry gets everyone together because Barry is more and more when he talks with the group in the early stages. Barry is to kind of quickly come to the conclusion. It's like, well, maybe we should actually think about having to uh, have to kill people. Like he didn't want to say it, but like the guy that seemed to have had the coolest head, all of a sudden when really realizing there's no way out of this and people's heads will start to blow off, all of a sudden we start having people coming with the conclusion that they are probably going to be forced to actually perform this event or do this thing of which that they are to have been said on an overhead to do. So so these people are all in a room together, and so now there's a group of people all with guns. And so the first thing that they decide to try to do is try to do some mercy killings where they end up picking like the oldest people who are like they're in their 50s or 60s, and eventually try and shoot them first, but then realize that there's only like 7 of them. And so they line all those people against the wall, and so Barry just starts randomly or seemingly randomly choosing people to die. And of course, Mike and Leandra are into that group, so it's like obviously they're going to die because Barry is just seeing Mike as this person that's going to butt heads with Barry. Uh, so eventually, this big group of people is to be seemingly killed off, and so we just end up seeing like people getting like just shot in the head consistently. Barry is to desperately ask somebody to turn on some music or radio or something and to blare it as loudly as possible because Barry does not want to hear these people begging for their lives or to try to bargain or whatever. We end up having also Barry in this one bathroom, and this woman is like throwing herself at him like towards like the end of the film, and like she's basically just undoing her top, and she's to basically show uh, Barry her bra and whatever. Like, is this something you want? And so Barry is to just snap this woman's neck, sadly, because he's like, I'm not going to waste the bullet. And because he still has a wife and kids to go to. Like, what is he going to do, like, going and, like, effing this woman when, like, eventually everyone's going to probably have to die anyways? And plus, on top of that, eventually, like, during this whole passionate lovemaking, these people could get killed, or the woman could get the gun out of Barry's hand. Any number of scenarios could have played out to where Barry is just like, well, sorry, like, it's just like we're all gonna die anyways, and having some woman throw herself at Barry is just like, I'm sorry, I have a wife at home. Sorry, like that's truth. So, uh, that's where I was kind of like saddened of like, well, like there's probably a number of people that probably do have like real like relationships in this office, but anyways, pushing on. So what ends up happening is I think Danny ends up going and turning off all the lights uh, in between the firing, the shooting, and whatever, we end up having one guy who is to of barfed off to the side because he is to be so scared and is to be just like he hates that they're doing this, uh, to where he just barfs out of just pure fear. And so this guy is to have to go and almost shoot Mike, and Mike is like, dude, just give me the gun. Like, just don't do this. Like, just come on, man. Like, if anything, we can turn the tide here, and like, you don't have to do this. And so the lights start to turn off, and everybody just starts scrambling. There's to be any kind of light that is to come out like like warning lights or like an elevator door opening. Eventually, people are to get shot from that. So now we just get the mad scrambling around of everybody. So what ends up happening, kind of the craziness of this film, there's to be two people going into the elevator shaft, and eventually Barry is to kind of go up to the top floor of this building, and someone ends up getting crushed in the elevator, and that ends up getting Barry stuck in the elevator to where he has to like pull the elevator doors open to try and get out of there, because somebody ends up getting crushed in the very top of the elevator because they were just hanging out. So, uh, so we have the HR person who is to crazily kill a number of people, and eventually he ends up going and getting these like Molotov cocktails, and he's just like tossing them at people, and eventually they burst into flame, while both Mike and Linda are trying to try to get the heck out of there, and eventually spot the HR person who's like tossing Molotov cocktails. So, uh, I'm trying to get everything perfectly down. So, a lot of people are just kind of crazily running off. The group of Wyndham and Barry, Wyndham is to ask Barry, it's like, well, what should we do now? Like, how are we going to be able to count everybody that's going to be killed? And Barry's like, well, just kill everyone anyways. Like, it's eventually going to come down to that, so just kill everyone. Kill everyone that you see. So everybody's just to go off on their own, and everyone is to try to willy-nilly kill everybody. So eventually Leandra is to be with, I think, Chet and Marty, because Mike and Leandra just kind of separate for a little bit. And so Leandra ends up going and tossing a table because they're in the like cafe. So she ends up tossing a table over on like Wendell, and she ends up like axing him in the face, which is to kill him off. But that's to be after like this round, but still, like, I just wanted to just kind of mention that. So what ends up happening is eventually the loudspeaker is to go on and is to mention that the exact number of how many people are dead, and it's to be 29, so they have to kill one more person. And so the one guy who was to barf was to eventually go and try to go and shoot some people to try and kill someone off, and he ends up getting knifed in the leg, dropped, and so this girl is to grab the gun from him and almost shoot him, or just come up with some kind of way of killing this guy, because I don't know if she had the gun in her hand or the knife thing in her hand. The knife that's used to like cut papers, like the long stretch of knife. Anyways, pushing on. So they only had a certain amount of time to kill that last person, but nobody was able to get to anybody to kill that one last person. So 30 some odd other people end up getting killed. So you just all of a sudden start to see freaking heads being blown up, numerous heads, to where eventually you're like, oh, that person died. Oh, that person died. Oh, that's too bad. but you're just naturally assuming everyone is going to die. Um, Marty and Chet end up getting killed off, like the hipster or the hippy dippy guys, the kind of weed smoking guys. Uh, so I think Leandra is by herself in the cafeteria, killing off Wyndham, trying to save some people in there. But anyways, maybe she was with Mike. I'm not. I can't guarantee that because I guarantee it. Anyways, pushing on. So uh, it was a joke. So eventually, what ends up happening is now the stakes after this round, after everyone's head was to get blown off, and it was kind of funny because the one guy who's like, "Oh man, I think it's all over. I think I think they murdered everybody," and then all of a sudden this guy's head just goes, "Pa!" and so he ended up dying also. So uh, so the next thing is to basically have it just be a free for all where kill everybody. Whoever kills the most people wins, which is really just like whoever is left standing is the one who wins. So now everybody's just killing everybody. Wyndham is desperately, before he ends up getting killed, is desperately trying to get the more numbers of people killed than Barry. And so really that's not the whole stakes of it all. It's basically just like you have to just kill everyone off anyways. So Leander does a good job of killing Wyndham. So a lot of people just end up getting killed here. The H&R person guy ends up getting, I think he ends up getting shot, and his Molotov cocktail ends up dropping from behind him. So I guess he ends up just burning up alive. Uh, Basically, like this all really just comes down to because everyone eventually gets killed off. Uh, Danny eventually gets out of the elevator, kind of the outside of it, to go into the elevator and to drop into one floor. And immediately once the elevator door opens, Barry is to be there, and he ends up shooting Danny in the head and killing her off. So, uh, basically, eventually, all this just comes down to there really just being Barry and Mike and Leandra left. And then Leandra ends up dying because I think she ends up getting like a bullet into the side of her chest and she dies. So eventually it's just between Mike and Barry. So, and wow, I'm doing actually pretty good time for this. Because I thought of like, dude, am I already at an hour yet? Like, I was either gonna assume that I'm either at like 20 minutes or I'm at like an hour already. Because when I start to explain things, I either think that I'm like spending way too much time or like not enough time, and that's kind of like the weird thing of it all. Like, I can't tell exactly how much time I'm spending. So, finishing it up. So it's interesting because supposedly Barry is to have military experience compared to everyone else. The H&R person is to mention that supposedly Barry might have an advantage over everyone else because supposedly he has military experience. But what it all really just comes down to is eventually Mike is to get on top of Barry and I think hit him with some kind of brick or like something that we kind of see here, some kind of item that we see here to just kind of smash Barry's face in because eventually like guns run out of bullets and whatever. So like Mike wins this whole thing. Everyone else ends up being killed for one reason or another. And like I hope I covered everything. Like I hope I've kind of covered most of this film like in a roundabout way. There's not perfection here, but oh well, like most of it was covered. So, I feel good about it. So, Mike wins, and so we have these security guard guys who grab Mike and drag him out of the building to make it to this hangar where now we have this guy who I think is just called the Voice. Yeah, he's just the Voice. And oh, here's the one part I also forgot. Marty and Chet were going and grabbing all the bombs that were coming from the back of people's heads and stacking them all together in one little napkin to try to see if they can like detonate these bombs somehow and explode one of these like metal like security things, but they died before they could really get to that. But here's the one thing that I had a problem with. Like Mike also had thing in back of his head also, but I guess like we never really got to that. But so Mike goes to this place, this hangar, to talk to the guy who is just to be called the voice. And so at first these people are just like, well, once you answer our questions, like you're going to be done here. And I would just be like, well, am I going to be like retirement done? Like, am I going to get $1 million grand prize out of all this because I survived? Because how am I ever going to go and want to work at another job just like this? Because I'm going to have nightmares for the rest of my life, and this will probably be the only job that I could get. And so, like, there should have been some cash money prize after this also. Just like, dude, you're going to be taken care of for the rest of your life. Meaning, like, here's $1 million. Go off and F off. But they didn't say that. They didn't say anything about any kind of, like package or whatever, severance package that this guy was going to get from this thing. Nothing. So Mike is to eventually try and ask these people questions, and the voice guy is just like, no, 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 no. Like, you're not here to ask us questions. We're here to ask you questions. So the voice guy is to mention, like, well, how do you feel after all of this is over? Do you feel sad? Do you feel relieved? And so Mike is just never going to want to answer these questions. He does not give an F about these people. And so Mike is to eventually tell these guys and give them a heads up. It's like, hey, so you guys have kind of seen everything that we've been doing, right? And the voice guy is just like, well, yeah. So Mike is like, well, you do remember us like collecting all those like bombs out of everyone's neck also, right? And the guy's like, yeah, so what? So all of a sudden we consistently see Mike all of a sudden thrusting and grabbing these security guards to really just find out that he just placed bombs while they weren't realizing it all over their clothes. And so Mike ends up crazily going and grabbing the device that has all the names of all the bombs, and he just crazily starts to shift toggles to eventually explode all these people or to get them wounded. And then he ends up grabbing a machine gun and shooting all these guys off and killing all the security guys off. And so Mike goes and makes sure that the last one left is to be this voice guy. And so this guy has to mention, it's like, well, hey, like, you realize what you did is just like is pointless, but Mike ends up like shooting him multiple times just to make sure that that guy is dead. And so then Mike goes and heads out of the hangar and is to drop his gun and is to just like breathe in like fresh air. And so all of a sudden we end up seeing like Mike being panned away from to see a huge cluster of TV screens that just have a bunch of other people who have, I guess, at some point won this competition. And so, like, they've kind of done this through a number of places and a number of locations to, I guess, assume, hey, if this movie does good enough, we'll do another one of these. But I guess there probably wasn't enough money to put together to do another one of these. But with that said, I think I'm going to get out of here. I think that's all I wanted to say about this film. Interesting but sad. But like, there's also some interesting action moments also through here, through like common items and whatever. But with that said, bye everybody. Bye everybody.